today with Bernard Baars, acclaimed author in psychobiology, including his newest book titled On Consciousness, Science and Subjectivity, Updated Works on Global Workspace Theory. Bernie is the originator of Global Workspace Theory, GWT, and Global Workspace Dynamics, a theory of human cognitive architecture, the cortex, and consciousness, and one of the founders of the modern science of consciousness. This seminar features two interesting student interviewers, cognitive science student Ilian Daskalov from UC Irvine and Alea Skwara, a PhD candidate at Sarin Lab, Center for Mind and Brain at UC Davis. Ilian, Alea, and Bernie Baars will discuss his global workspace theory, GWT, which began with this question. How does a serial, integrated, and very limited stream of consciousness emerge from a nervous system that is mostly unconscious, distributed, parallel, and of enormous capacity? Global workspace theory is a widely used framework for the role of conscious and unconscious experiences in the functioning of the brain, as Bernie first suggested in 1983. And in this seminar, we'll explore how we can understand the rapidly accumulating body of evidence on global workspace functions. Hi, Alea. Hi, Ilian, and welcome. Before I hand the talking stick over to y'all, we'd love to learn a little bit more about each of you, please.
Thanks, Nat. Hi, my name is Alea Skwara. I am a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of California, Davis. I'm in the cognitive neuroscience area of our program. So basically, I'm a psychologist, meaning I care about questions of the human mind, but I look at those from a neuroscientific perspective. So the primary method I use in my PhD studies is EEG, or electroencephalography, so a way of looking at electrical impulses that are generated by the brain and recorded at the scalp. My research focuses primarily on compassion and responses to suffering. So in the lab I'm in, we study the effects of intensive meditation training actually on a whole range of things. So your attention, your perception, your emotions. And I'm specifically interested in how this sort of intentional training can actually shift the way that we relate to suffering, whether it's our own suffering or that of others. And the primary question that I'm looking at in my dissertation is whether engaging in this sort of practice can actually help us widen our circle of care, meaning expand the classes or range of people for whom we find it easy to feel compassion and care when they suffer, and for whom we're willing to invest in helping them not suffer. So essentially expanding this care that we kind of easily and automatically have for those who are close to us to a broader and broader circle of people.
Mm-hmm. And hello, everyone. My name is Ilian Daskalov. My initial academic interests were very different than the people present in this conversation. I initially started studying business administration, marketing, management, but somewhere along the way, I got more interested in human behavior than in corporational behavior. So eventually I moved to California, and I decided I wanted to study the human behavior, the human brain, and human consciousness. And all that began with meditation. And once I started meditating, I noticed a lot of things about myself that I wasn't really noticing before. And all of that got even more involved in my life as I started regularly going to sensory deprivation chambers, which are, for listeners, these very fascinating rooms. There are different kinds, but the particular ones I went to were rooms where they're filled with salt water, and you lay in the water and you're sort of just floating, and the room temperature is the temperature of your body. It's complete darkness. You're isolated from any sound. So theoretically, all your senses are deprived, and you're just left with yourself and your thoughts. And it was very interesting for me to observe what emerged to my conscious brain, to what I was thinking about. And I started wondering, why am I thinking about these things? Where is this coming from? Where is this emerging from? So how did these unconscious processes happening inside of me because of my experience, my environment, my genetics. Why were they coming? And I was bringing them to my attention. And that is a very fascinating field to me. And I am so excited about our conversation today. And I want to learn a lot more about human consciousness. So hopefully.
That's interesting. That's very interesting to hear, because as you and Alea know, we do have an awful lot of research on this spontaneous stream of consciousness, but it is. I'm willing to bet that some of your neuroscience professors don't know a thing about it, and this is sort of you're perfectly welcome to disagree with me on that, Alea, if you wish. But my observation, and you tell me if this is true or not, is that when people talk about the default network, for example, in the brain, that my hypothesis, at least, is that they're talking about the stream of consciousness. And the stream of consciousness is hardly passive, and it's hardly a default state. It is a very active state. It's a state that reflects our emotions and our current concerns and imagery and all those kinds of questions that spontaneously emerge and that we actually know about from Jerry Singer and other people over a very long period of time who collected that data, except that the people who actually know about it seem to be sort of a cult. I consider myself a member of the stream of consciousness cult, actually, and I wish we could draft a few more members. So let me know if that's true or not.
Well, I think there has been a pushback, and I think that this is a really interesting point. Like so for listeners, the default mode network is a network of brain regions that tend to become more active in the absence of an explicit task. And so this first became something that people talked about broadly with the advent of resting state fMRI, so functional magnetic resonance imaging. People realized that if you put someone in a scanner and you record their brain activity and you don't give them an explicit task to do, like press this button when you see a box of this color or whatever, cognitive task we give people, there's a network of brain regions that actually increased in their activity. And so this got named the default mode network.
The network that increases is when they stop doing that task. Is that
exactly
correct?
In the absence of an explicit task. So when they stop doing an external, you were instructed to do this task, there's this network of brain regions that Bernie was talking about that increases their activity. And so researchers in the kind of the default mode network world were like, oh, this is like the brain's metabolic baseline.
Right.
As if nothing is happening when we're at rest. So there was this reference to the default mode network, like Bernie's saying, as some sort of neural baseline that you could subtract away from things. So like, great, when you're doing a task, just collect someone at rest and then have them do a task and subtract the two. And then we know what brain activity is due to the task. I think that there's been movement away from that, Bernie. I think you're completely right that that, if we think about what our brain does when we're in the absence of explicit tasks, we're mind wandering, we're stream of consciousness, we're doing all sorts of stuff. And there has been a movement to say like, no, that's not a baseline. That's a different sort of cognitive task. But I don't know that people think of it in terms of consciousness, which I think, Bernie, is your perspective of the stream of consciousness or conscious awareness. So I think there's been
I should say, by the way, that if you look at Jerry Singer's work and the work of other people who've done that, not to mention all the psychoanalysts who've been doing it since 1900, what appears in the spontaneous stream of consciousness, of course, is lots of conscious stuff but you don't really understand, if you're the person having that stream of consciousness, why that, just as you were saying, Ilian, why that particular thought or visual image, or kind of weird off the subject, because after all, you're not doing disciplined thinking, you're doing free thinking. So all kinds of unconscious and primed stuff, whatever, all kinds of stuff is emerging. And because human beings are adaptable, and because the stream of consciousness is a part of our adaptability, I would say hypothetically that the things that are most important for us as individual human beings are the things that would tend to come up first of all and most vividly. And perhaps, when we get drowsy, we have, in a way, we have the experience of sensory isolation, because the thalamus shuts down sensory input. And so I like to pay attention to that moment in the stream of my own consciousness when things get really weird. When you stop talking like an adult to yourself, and some visual image comes up, or some thought that is clearly not an adult thought, right? And it's actually a distinct moment, sometimes, at least in my experience. And it's kind of a fun thing. It's an important thing, actually, psychologically and in brain terms and so on. But it's also it's a very safe way to play with your head.
Well, and I think, if I can jump in, I think this actually leads us really well into our first question.
Yes.
That we wanted to talk about, which is like, how do we define consciousness? Ilya, is that where you're getting ready to go?
That's where I was going with it.
So here we are.
I wanted to just, if you can, Bernie, if you can just give us a definition of consciousness, just so we're all on the same page. And
you're going to ask me the easy one, right?
We're going to start with that one, yes. How do we define consciousness?
Well, I believe the answer in the history of science is that you use whatever seems plausible and easy to observe. So if you're Galileo in whatever year it was when he started to figure out how do you measure temperature, for example, and this is in Padua, I guess, in Italy. I'm not sure if it was exactly at that time, but he figured out that, well, these little bottles filled with oils drift up and down when they're suspended in water, and the order of these little colored bottles that drift up and down, they drift up and down depending on their internal density, and so if you can put some stuff in there that has less density, or simply lower the water level inside of these little colored bottles, then you can actually get a visual. It's not almost quantitative, not quite quantitative, but at least you can tell which is warmer and which is colder. That was the first thermometer, actually, if I'm right about that. There were probably all kinds of people, working in smithies and making the campfire for the evening, and they learned about colors and of different things that you threw into the campfire, so they knew about temperature at some level.
Ironically, I have that one. I have that thermometer in my room, actually.
And so the bottom line is that Galileo was very clever. He was a very good observer. He was very thoughtful, and he was hanging around a lot of smart people as well. And so this is one of the great places where ideas emerge. And so he came up with the first one, and he recognized, I suppose, with his kind of mind, he recognized that this was a significant thing, because it's not just enough to see it, but you kind of have to recognize that here is a development in human technological and scientific history. And that, of course, set the thing off. And so if you ask Galileo, what is heat? That's analogous to asking me, what is consciousness? Because we're maybe 2-3 steps above the level of these floating little glass bottles. And of course, the first level is the old one. Can you give people a conscious stimulus? And will they tell you about it and be accurate? So accurate, the condensed way of saying it, I think, is accurate voluntary report. And because the senses are so easy to study, relatively speaking, you start with sensory stimuli, and then you get to Newton and the prism experiments, and people were just in love with the problem of color early in the 19th century. And Goethe came up with his own 7-color theory, which, poetically was supposed to be right, but turned out not to be right. So they argued it out. They did the right experiments, and it grew. The sensory sciences came from that kind of thing, and psychophysics and all that kind of stuff. It's enormously important. And now we have about half the academic population of the world telling us that we don't know anything about consciousness. That's not true. That's not true. We have a lot of good stuff. And of course, our ignorance is a lot bigger than what we know, but we're not starting from zero.
So what I'm hearing you kind of say here is that, in a way, our definition of consciousness is limited, or at least our scientific definition of consciousness is limited by what is observable. Just like before, the understanding of heat was limited by what was observable in this thermometer, this kind of first thermometer contraption. And so we're very early in some ways, very early in our scientific ability to measure what is consciousness. So when I ask you as a scientist of consciousness, what is consciousness? You can give me the observable definition, but that doesn't mean
exactly right.
That and is consciousness itself.
Then, of course, the next step is what's called bootstrapping. And bootstrapping is sort of a humorous metaphor of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which is not recommended if you're climbing a mountain. But it kind of works as a popular joke because we go to the next step. We go to the EEG, and then we get the dreadful EEG from 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Like and then 20 channels and
yes, exactly.
5 channels, yeah.
And you lose track. And this is actually true. It's a horror story, and scientists are not supposed to say bad things about their own knowledge of science. But we essentially forgot that people have thick skulls, and that you get a 99.9% drop in the signal-to-noise ratio between cortex and the outside of the skull. That was not a good idea. And people who worked with animals with tiny little skulls were able to get a lot better. But in any case, that was part of the process of blowing it really badly and then realizing that you're blowing it and fixing it and getting better.